So my favorite thing to do, and it's so simple, is to grab a pillow. And
Can I say, when I heard you talk about this before, this is one of the best things I've ever heard. Like, genuinely, it's so simple. When you said it, welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to an episode of the Prana Project podcast. I'm your host, Daniel James. And if you have struggled with stress, if you have struggled with feeling burnt out or struggling to manage your emotions, then today's episode is going to be of extreme value to you. I'm very blessed to have Amy Shearer today, and they are the topics that we are going to deep dive today. So Amy, welcome to the podcast.
thank you so much. So good to be here.
I'm very fascinated by you. Your story is absolutely fantastic. As I said before, we could go all over the place, but there's some real topics here that I think we can deep dive and give some real value for people. And it's something that you know all too well. So can we just take a step back and talk to my audience about how you got into this space and why the topics we're going to discuss are so important to you?
Yeah, I would love to. So, um, let's see. So actually almost 4 years ago to this week, um, I had this big change and shift in my life. And to be honest, a few months before that, all of it kind of came to a head. So I used to be in retail, fashion retail in New York City. I was in that fast pace, go, go, go life for about 15 years and was very accomplished, was really focused, and but didn't really do very much in terms of allowing myself time to rest. And prior to that, I really had a lot of um, traumatic experiences in my life that I never processed. And so in December of 2018, yes, December of 2018, my husband and I were in Hawaii for Christmas, and I woke up early one morning and was just, my whole body was shaking. Couldn't sleep, was so stressed out. And I mean, we had waited, an entire year to go on this vacation for 2 weeks. And I couldn't actually stop my body from feeling like it was in fight or flight, which is what I know now. And I got up and I looked in the mirror and was like, I don't even know who I am anymore. I had this reflection of that, looking back at me and saying, I don't even know, what I'm doing is what I really want to do. I just feel like I am so disengaged with myself. And I was really sad. I felt really depressed inside, and I didn't talk to anybody about it. I kept it all in just because I was like, it'll pass. I'll keep going. I'll keep going. I'll keep going. So when I left Hawaii, I came home. I was in the back of my head of like, something has to shift and change. I had gotten a call from my doctor who was saying, your endometriosis is so severe, we're going to have to do a hysterectomy. My gastroenterologist was like, we have some severe digestion issues we got to uncover. And I was like, I'm only 43 years old. Like, what is happening? And so several months later, I was like, okay, I started going into therapy, and I was talking through a lot of my experiences as a child, but also my work experience. And at that time, I was really angry with just all of the responsibilities that were laid upon me. And it's a pretty common thing.
You were quite hurt, weren't you, as well? So you said you worked in retail. Just for you were quite high up in retail, weren't you? Just so
Yeah, I
people can
was.
clarify, because
Yeah.
in the UK, hearing someone works in retail, that kind of implies you just kind of work on the shop floor. So I want to clarify that you don't.
Yeah.
You were quite high up in retail. So we talk about stress
Yeah.
and stuff and how you were feeling. I
Yeah.
just want to clarify for the audience that you were
Yeah.
actually quite high up in that field.
Yeah, I was the VP of retail for North America for a French brand. And so I was traveling across the United States several times a month, visiting stores. And I loved what I did because I loved, interacting, and I loved fashion. I loved fashion my whole life. But there was a point where I asked for support from my CEO in terms of layering on more people into my team. And I was told no. And it came at a point where I was like, I need to start taking better care of myself. And so I decided 4 years ago this week to resign. And I left my retail career, that part of my retail career behind at that point, and started this journey of healing. And it's amazing looking back on it. I didn't know anything about the nervous system. I didn't even know that what I was experiencing was burnout. I didn't even know that that was a real thing back then, you know? And there's real science behind it. And there's a lot of, now I have a deeper understanding of what that really means. But those first few weeks after leaving my job, I couldn't stop moving. Like I was like, okay, I'll go walk the park like 6 times. It was a 3-mile loop. Like just kept going and going and going. My body was so used to being in that state of movement. And then I would come home and just completely collapse, like just collapse. There were days that I would take like 3 naps during the day, and then slowly started to get to the point where I didn't have to go on as many walks, but I also felt much more sadness and much more depressed about kind of the state of my life. And I put so much effort into being into this in this role. Like I had goaled myself to be the VP, and they were basically, creating positions for me, and they wanted me to be the CEO of this brand. There was so much potential for me, but my body and my mind like could not handle it anymore. And I had like a lot of regrets. I had a lot of there was a lot of self-punishment around, why can't you just do this? Like, get yourself together, like all of these things. And, it took me to a place of realizing, okay, I don't even really know what healing means. Therapy was helpful, movement was helpful, but I still felt like there was something missing. But because I was kind of always looking for my job as my validation in life, I quickly went into coaching and got certified in January of 2020 and became a career coach. And then we all know what happened in 2020. So everything kind of went on a pause. And it was during that summer of 2020 that I first experienced breathwork, and had my first breathwork journey with a trained teacher. And it was a 90-minute breathwork journey. You can definitely tell by my personality, I'm not just going to do the short breathwork journey. I'm going to do the 90-minute breathwork journey. Like, I've never done it before. Why not do 90 minutes? I was an avid soul cycle person, and I would do the like 3-hour 90-minute classes, and like, do several a week. Like it was just, I was so intense. I was so intense on my body. I was so intense on like really pushing myself, because I felt like that's how I could only feel good about who I was. And so that breathwork journey it changed my life, honestly. There was so much that had been stored in my body that I had been talking about with my therapist, or I had been processing in my mind. But it was that breathwork journey where I finally felt like I had clarity about what needed to heal and where I needed to start with my healing. And I really felt for the first time after that, what it meant to shift states of consciousness, what it meant to feel at peace with oneself, what it meant to fully release. And it was that moment where I was like, oh my God, my body is holding so much. Like my body is storing there's so much here in my body that I haven't even listened to or been attuned to. Like all of the pain in my digestive system, all of the, endometriosis, and then the fibroids, and all of the things that a lot of women, currently are challenged with. All of that was emotions stuck in my body.
Your body's trying to tell you.
And yeah. And in that moment, I was like, okay, the missing piece is that I need to work on my body. I need to like listen to it and support it. And I had never done that before. I had been doing the opposite. I had just been pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and going and going and going, thinking that that was what I needed to do in order to relax. So that began this kind of passion, I should say, and deep interest in learning about somatics, learning about the nervous system. Um, and in 2022, I was certified as a somatic stress release practitioner, and learning about how stress works with your body and how we're all designed to process stress really changed my whole perception of like, what it means to experience stress in your life.
Mhm.
And through all this time, the emotional part of it is such a huge component. I mean, all of the somatic things that you do, there's emotion that you don't even necessarily need to know why it's there. It just is ready to come out of your body. And that's a lot of what happens in breath work in the beginning, for sure,
Mhm.
is that you're breathing and your body's releasing, and then you start crying, and then you start laughing, and then you're like in a state of bliss, and you go through all of these different shifts in your emotional state, and that's really your body releasing those emotions. So now what I do, and I love to do, is to help individuals recover from burnout, recover from stress, and really know how to like work with their body to regulate their nervous system. Regulating your nervous system and emotional regulation go hand in hand.
Mhm.
They're
And
not
that's
separate.
and that's what we're going to deep dive today. Before we go into that, though, I want to just sort of loop back a little bit because with your story, like I said, with where you were, like you, like vice president, like essentially the correct term of the like you're being groomed essentially for the CEO role, which is fantastic. Like you were like at the peak of the peak. I just want to, because there's a lot of women that we listen to this that are on that path a lot earlier than you. So maybe early 20s, early 30s, that they're coming up and that's their goal. They want to be CEO. They're absolutely smashing life. Just a few things I want to sort of touch back on that. Why do you think that the CEO didn't allow you to have the time off? My question there is, was it a male?
It was.
It was a male, yeah. Would you, throughout your journey throughout doing this, did you feel that there was almost like a point to prove being a woman in, not to say the fashion industry, because I imagine that there's a lot more women in that, but as a woman, a strong, independent woman, did you feel a lot of pressure? And would you say that that added to the eventual burnout? Because what I'm trying to do is just link it
Mhm.
back to people that are earlier on in their journey and look for the signs. And if you were just like, I've got to push, I've got to push, I've got to push, ignoring all the red
Mhm.
flags, was that something that you were doing to almost prove essentially maybe you were good enough that you could do it? Was that something that was playing on your mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, that's the emotional kind of personality piece. And it wasn't so much that it was because it was a male. It was because when I was really young, I developed um, I developed people pleasing and overgiving traits. So I was always trying to please other people and make other people happy and help them to be really comfortable so I could feel comfortable, which is a safety mechanism. It's so you feel like you belong. So it's so you feel like um, you have a place. And most individuals that get to a place of burnout are it's not even about you know achieving a goal. It's about the purpose, the reason why you're trying to achieve that goal. If you're achieving that goal and in the process only doing it because you think that that goal will validate you, that gives you a reason for being there, which is a lot of what I felt like. I was going way beyond my job role. I was going way beyond what was on my job description. And it made me very valuable to the company, but it also was depleting me in so many ways. I was doing things I didn't want to do because I just wanted to be accepted, and I wanted to feel needed, and I wanted to be in this place where I was really, really important. And not because I felt like I wanted to be important for me. It was because I wanted my CEO to see me as like, oh yeah, she's so valuable. And he would tell me those things. So it was this thing of like, okay, yeah, you're giving me the validation I need. I'll keep going. But I never, when I finally asked and said and started to listen, several months after that time in during Christmas when I was in Hawaii and I started to finally ask for what I needed, I was shut down,
Mm.
and that was the point of me saying, I can't stay in this role anymore. It's untenable. Like I'm already sick from this
But,
role.
but isn't that an interesting thing though? Because as a people pleaser, to then you finally put your needs first,
Mhm.
potentially for the first time, and that's a big thing for you. And
Oh,
then
huge.
the response is no.
No.
Like most
Yeah.
people's natural default setting would be like, okay, then I was carrying doing what I was doing, and then you almost feel like you maybe have upset that person because they've said no to you. Somehow
Yeah.
you've now offended them, and then you've got to work overly hard. Is that something
Yeah.
that not necessarily that you did in this because this was clearly the straw that broke the camel's back, but in
Yes.
previous situations, if someone said no to you like that, would you have felt those things? Can I imagine a lot of people that do people please when they
Hmm.
do stand up for themselves initially,
Hmm.
if they don't get the response they were necessarily looking for, they'll just get
Hmm.
back to, okay, I'll just be a people pleaser again, and I'm sorry that I've offended you. Is that kind of like a natural cycle that happens?
Yeah. I think yes. And I'll say that most individuals that get to this place where they're feeling the symptoms physically, and they know, like, they actually get to a place like a breaking point before they finally stand up for themselves. And what I've learned from working with so many individuals about this, that and they all have those overgiving, people pleasing tendencies. Even the high overachieving tendencies is really about that external validation. Like, I'm going to be the best at this in the world because I want people to recognize me as the best, right? And there's some good things to that. I'm not denying that, like, I still love those things, but if you are if you are stepping fully away from yourself in order to achieve those things externally, you're going to come to a place where I came, which was like, I was really mad. Like, I was so mad that he said that.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working with him and like denying all of my needs for so long that I finally asked her what I needed. And it was like, the response was actually, you need to take one for the team. And in my head, I was like, I have been taking
Oh,
one for the team for the last 3 years.
that's even worse. That's even worse. Is it like
Yeah.
you'd rather than just say no, I can't afford you to take the time off, rather than you need to take one
Yeah,
for the team. That is like completely disregarding your needs. That's always like, no, you will suffer for the greater good. And it's like, what? That's even worse.
exactly. Well, I went home and I like cried my eyes out to my husband, and he was just like, what is happening? And the next morning I woke up and I rolled over and I said, I'm resigning. And that's what I did. To be honest, I think, um, for many of us that are highly sensitive, and that sensitivity starts when we're really young, and we are trying to attune to other people's nervous systems in our lives when we're really young, because that's essentially where that all starts, is this need for safety and need for belonging. And there are a lot of people in retail that are highly sensitive because they're so creative and they're so detail oriented. And there is this there is this cycle, and I won't go into it, but there is this cycle of like really high achievers and really, kind of doing the job before you actually get the job. And so I got to a point where I was just angry. And that's when you know that you're starting to heal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when you start to get angry, it's reflecting that someone just crossed a boundary for you. And essentially my whole life I never had a boundary. And I finally set one, and that person was like, you need to take one for the team. And I was pissed. I was like, wait a minute, I have been taking one for the team for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And so that anger is showing that you're finally starting to honor things for yourself, right? And so I actually felt good about that anger. And thankfully I had a guide at this time. I had a great therapist who was helping me, and she was helping me work through that anger. I mean, I worked through that anger for 6 months. But yeah, I don't know, for people that have pushed themselves like this and have a history of people pleasing or overgiving, when they finally set that boundary, it's such a big deal that if they're denied, it's like, that's when the anger shows up, right? It's like,
Yep.
you could walk away and be like, no, okay, all right, and feel it for a moment of like, maybe I shouldn't have said that, I feel bad. But I'm guaranteeing in like a week you're going to be really pissed off, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And that's good. And for a lot of women, I know you asked about women, a lot of women, are raised to hide their anger
Mm-hmm.
and not like express it. And so for the women that I work with, when they finally are angry, I'm like, yes, like, let it out. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so much of that anger is being stored in your body from who knows how long. And just similar to me, it takes them several months to process that anger, to release it finally. So yeah, to answer your question, I think it's not necessarily about the gender of the person like leading. It's more about the dynamic that's created. And that's one of the things the biggest pill I had to swallow is that I created that reality.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the hardest. That's one of the hardest things when I'm working with clients as well. It's the best thing you can do, and the hardest thing is to accept that your reality is down to you, whether you like it
Yeah.
or not. Like, you can't control the people, but you've responded to situations that it's led you to where you're right. Again, me and depression. Look back,
Yeah.
like, it was my fault. Like,
Yeah.
and I spent so long playing the victim, blaming
Yeah.
other people, situations, circumstances. But when I finally empowered myself by saying, I've got to take some responsibility here, and I probably got to take more responsibility than I would like, and it's comfortable.
Mhm.
But actually, that's what then actually empowers you. And you've hit some really cool things, which, again, we're going to deep dive that in a second when it comes to emotions. But again, just talking about that, emotions are actually signposts. They're trying to tell you something. So when you're angry,
Yeah.
most people, especially again women, because again, if you're an angry woman, then you just play into that whole stereotype of, oh, do you know you can't handle it in the workplace, and do you get back in your box? Or if you're an angry male, God, look at you. Like, and again, it's that whole thing with anger being bad. Well, anger's just an emotion. There's nothing good about it. Like, do you know I mean,
Mhm.
if someone comes and punches my mum, like, I should be getting angry about that. That's a good response. The problem is, as we're going to talk about, is like when it becomes unchecked and unmanaged, and you're just kind of putting it in that box and it explodes. That's then the problem. But let's just talk about stress. Let's sort of jump back
Okay.
to stress, because this is the big thing. Like I said, again, the reason we start off with stress is I know that's kind of order you kind of working with stuff. So I want to try and keep it in the order that you work with clients in. So let's just actually define what stress is, because people use the word stress all the time. I'm stressed, I'm stressed, I'm stressed. That's a
Mhm.
very umbrella term. So can we just actually define what is stress?
Yeah. Well, everybody's definition of stress might be a little bit different based on their perception, right? But when you break it down all the way down, stress is really a stimulus that's coming into your environment that's asking you to respond in some way. So the idea of living a stress-free life isn't realistic. And like that's not reality. And that's not what stress management or nervous system regulation is about. It's not about that at all. And actually, some stress is actually very, very good for you. Stress will help motivate you. Um, there's stressors that come from, like, for example, being at a birthday party or having a surprise party or getting a promotion. There's levels of stress that actually propel you forward and don't bring you into this period of like shutdown. There's natural levels of stress that happen throughout the day. So you kind of have this window of like resilience with stress. And over time, if you don't manage your stress, that window gets a lot smaller. But really throughout our day, anytime we have something come into our environment that's asking us to respond, it might be the doorbell ringing, it might be the phone ringing, it might be an email. Some of it is just going to be like a little blip. If you imagine it kind of like a wave, it might be a little wave where something's coming into your environment and it's asking you to respond. And so your stress level goes up just a little bit. And then you do the response however it feels good to you. You reply to the email and then you come out of it like as the wave crests and comes back into the ocean, right? So we are designed to work with response to stimulus in that way. Now, there are also points in our day where our nervous system drops when we go into what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, but also in the dorsal vagal part of our nervous system. And that's very natural. That happens after we eat. So sometimes if you feel really tired after you eat, your whole body is processing and your nervous system is connected, your dorsal vagal nervous system is connected to your stomach. So you're naturally having these peaks and valleys throughout the day. Now, if you have a lot of stressors in your life, and those are very specific to everyone, my stressors, the things that keep me in that sympathetic part of my nervous system, that fight or flight, might be different from yours, right? And so if I'm experiencing those repeatedly and over time and consistently throughout a day, and I don't actually help myself come out of that, sympathetic state on a regular basis, then that window of working with my stress and coming out of the sympathetic and back into this calm and content state, it gets much more narrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, what happens is you're constantly going up into your sympathetic nervous system, like that wave is cresting super high and it's crashing down. So you're like doing these big peaks and valleys. So it's no longer these rolling hills, it's these big peaks and valleys of your nervous system. And that's what happens when you experience chronic stress. Chronic stress, if experienced, over months and months of time that goes unchecked, eventually will turn into burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And burnout is part of your nervous system that puts you in this place of freeze and fawn. Burnout is really defined by prolonged periods of stress that put you in a place of apathy with work, or in relationships. Depression often pops up if you were in that state. You feel like you're not really inspired to do very much. There's this, it's not actually being completely shut down, but your motivation level is really low. And that's a whole other part of your nervous system. It's actually not part of your sympathetic nervous system. So stress is really like, the pressure to have a stress-free life, like, let's just get rid of that pressure. Like, it's not real. Like the work that we need to do is just to be able to widen that window of your ability to work with your stress in your life, like to widen your capacity for working with stress. And that actually can be really simply done with, some nervous system exercises, and also like really starting to work with your emotions.
Mm-hmm. So
Which is a big
I think one of the biggest things for me, there's a book, it's not The Body Keeps the Score. I know you've read that one. Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Have you read that book? By
No.
Dr. Robert Sapolsky, I think his name is, and basically talks about how in the animal kingdom, when basically zebras are being chased by lions, they're in a super fight or flight response. They go crazy, but then afterwards, what happens is they then calm down. Whereas with
Yeah.
human beings, we don't. We basically stay absolutely wired, and what happens is animals tend to shake. So they just
Yeah.
shake all the we're going to in a second about mobilizing the stress. They shake all that stress out of their body, so they literally can go back to calm. Whereas with humans, we don't. And what tends to happen is we tend to replay it over and over again in our head if something's
Yep.
happened, and we literally replay that lion chasing us constantly. So we literally spend all day in that fight or flight response, and then we can't get out of it. And then there's what you mentioned, like the body will start to shake and all these things, and we're like, what the hell is going on here? And then people don't go and sit with it. They just keep themselves busy. They're busy being busy, not really doing anything. And then again, finally, then that sort of leads to, again, yes, it leads to burnout, but also leads to, again, stress, one of the biggest causes of disease as well, which people don't tend to link the two. It's like, if you actually look at it, stress, when it comes to heart attacks, when it comes to strokes, when it comes to all this stuff, people don't realize how staying in that chronic fight or flight response can actually destroy you, like mentally, physically, like your entire body. So you mentioned here about one of the ways of dealing with the stress is to actually mobilize the stress. So what does that actually look like? We've kind of touched on it there, but like, what does that look like? Because people know what stress is. People, so you mentioned it there, people know when they're stressed. Again, whether it's at work, whether their kids are off the summer holidays, and it's just like they're just stressed. What's this step here about mobilizing it? What does that actually look like?
Yeah. Well, you just described, part of that. We like to think that we're not animals, but that part of us is designed just like the zebra. And like, so when we have a stressor come into our environment, what we're actually feeling in our body, and a lot of people call it a trigger. I actually don't like that word, so I use the word activation. Like, we feel an activation in our body. So maybe you'll feel it in your belly, maybe you'll feel it in your chest, maybe you'll feel it in your hands, right? And part of this work is really connecting with your body and like feeling what reaction you're having in your body and where that's coming from. Mobilizing is essentially saying, okay, I have this activation in my body, and now I need to help that energy release from my body. So in the case of the zebra, it sees a lion, it starts to run. It's like the stimulus is, oh, warning, warning, lion, it's going to come after me, it's going to eat me, it's going to run, right? Maybe there's another lion that's there, like it's two lions, and then the other lion's in a fight, right? Like, but he's like, I got to get out of here. So he runs and runs and runs, and he's finally safe. And that's his mobilization, right? Just as it would be your mobilization if you were the zebra in the field with the lion. And so that is an example of mobilization. Now, there are so many different ways in which you can mobilize. A lot of people mobilize their stress through exercise. So, for me, it was doing like multiple soul cycle classes a day. And I felt afterward relaxed, but it was a different kind of relaxed. And I'll explain that in a second. It could be shaking out your arms and legs. It could be taking breaths. The real way to know is by connecting in with your body, feeling that energy, that activation in your body, and like asking your body what it needs, right? So it could be different for the other stressors in your life. And so when you mobilize, it's really about deepening the connection with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I know for me that if I have a conversation with someone and it gets, heated, like we get angry, then I need to go for a walk and shake my arms and shake my legs, right? Because actually anger, you'll see this. I mean, your initial reaction when you're in that kind of situation, even if you're not even noticing it, your hands are going to get clenched, you're going to get hot, like you're going to feel stiffness in your legs, and that's your body's natural reaction to getting ready to fight. Even though I've never thrown a punch in my life except at the gym, but those are the things that happen. So I've learned for me that when I get angry, I need to shake out my arms and shake out my legs to let that energy go, because I'm not going to go and like actually punch the person, right? For others, tapping is a great mobilization. I actually teach the EFT protocol, but even just tapping on that area where you're feeling that activation in your body, like on your chest, if you're feeling like there's sadness in your heart space, rubbing your heart space or tapping on your heart space also helps. So really when I work with clients, it's about kind of figuring out what that energy needs, what that energy needs to release from your body. And once it mobilizes and once that energy is released from the body, then you start to feel okay. Like if you can start to recognize as it's leaving your body and noticing that you're coming out of this fight or flight and starting to relax and starting to release that energy and slowly go into a place of calm. It's different than being like when I would work out and I would be riding, Soul Cycle, I would come home and I would just collapse, right? And there's a really important step that we're missing when we just exercise, 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 and then collapse. We're missing the step of having our body and our mind recognize that we're coming out of that state of mobilization and we're coming out of that state of fight or flight. So you just want to be really aware of your body, be connected, be like actually feel how you're no longer feeling stressed, right? You're no longer feeling the stiffness in your hands. And it takes just a few minutes. It's not like you have to sit there for half an hour. It just takes a few minutes for you to recognize that. And then many times, you come into a place of restoration. Restoration is maybe just sitting quietly for a moment and letting your body just come into a place of calm. And then you can move on with your day. But there's also an element of then saying, okay, maybe my response was, some guy just cut me off and almost hit me as I was driving, right? And like that's a physical protection response. Like you're on high alert, you got to swerve out of the way. And afterwards, you're probably going to feel like you're shaking. And that's a great opportunity to mobilize and then help yourself come back into the state of calm, right? But sometimes, like you were explaining, it might be something that happened first thing in the morning that was a stressor that you haven't actually allowed yourself to mobilize yet. So like someone said something and it really hurt you and it's carrying, you're repeating it and ruminating it and it's circling in your brain and it's keeping you in this like alert state. And so after you mobilize and you do this work and you come into a place of calm, it's a really good idea for you to sit with, okay, the activation around what that person said to me, what was that emotion? What do I need to learn from that moment? What is it? Why is it important to me now? What can I learn from that? And then it's okay, like being in a place of acceptance. And this was what helped me. This is what changed everything for me. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. But accepting what is in this moment. So if you were really hurt or you were really angry with that person, saying to yourself, okay, I'm angry. I experienced anger. Like I honor the anger that's here for me. You know, acknowledging it. The acknowledgement of the emotion actually takes so much energy away from that. And then coming into a place of like, what is this reminding me of? Is this a pattern that's repeating? You know, what do I need to learn from this pattern? Is this pattern something that is trying to, do I need to relearn when this pattern started? Do I need to learn a lesson? Do I need to shift my behavior? And like, that's the deeper work, right?
Yeah. I think that there's the key thing you picked up on there, because I said you got the physical stuff, like we said, and that's where you see your ex-partner, and everyone's felt this, where your body just goes into you get that chemical dump of the adrenaline, the cortisol, and you're, like I said, shaking, and again, dabs at other points as well, but everyone's had that situation, I imagine, at some point. And then that's a good time, we're saying here, to mobilize by going to the gym, going for a walk, shake it off, just get that energy dispersed. The key thing you touched on there, like I said, is the emotional stuff that we do to ourselves. And like I said, the fact where what's happening is your partner may say something just completely innocent, but then what you've done is you've interpreted it the wrong way. And as you mentioned, there's old patterns, it's old habits, and you're then feeling a certain way. You're then stressing yourself out. You're then spending all day in that negative thought cycle, and it comes to the end of it. And what you're then saying there is like, right, just go back and just look at, right, well, why has this bothered you? Because your partner hasn't meant it that way. So why has it bothered you? And then, as you mentioned, that's then the deeper work. That's then actually asking yourself, right, why has this bothered me? Again, to use the word trigger, like, why has this triggered me? Like, what has this? How is just that word from someone I love and know doesn't mean it? How's that bothered me? And that's where people, I think, struggle, because most people struggle to think. Everyone thinks, but they don't realize that they're thinking. Like, mental activity is not thinking. And what happens is, as you mentioned, something happens in the morning, and by the evening, they've spent all day inside their own heads. They've not actually, if you say to them, what have you done all day? They can't even tell you. They've physically been in the world doing stuff, but they're just so inside their own heads. And we kind of do it to ourselves. And that also comes back down to, again, I look at me getting depressed. I did it to myself because I was stuck in such a negative space. So obviously, I know this is the deep work. Again, everyone talks about the word the deep work, but what can people do when they find themselves in that cycle of getting inside their own head? What is something that you just recommend? Again, just one tip that someone can do if they're noticing they get inside their own head, someone said something to them, how do they come back to the here and now? What can they do?
So my favorite tip, and because the nervous system is a safety system, which most people don't realize, like, and so for most of us that are in an activation, it's based on a feeling that we aren't necessarily safe. And it could be so unconscious. Like, you know, the thought, you're like, I feel safe. Like, no, actually, safety is a felt experience. Safety is sensory. And actually, when you're born, there's specific things that need to happen in your environment as your cerebellum is coming online and your brain is developing. The only way for you to know that you're safe is through touch. And so, and the first language we have, everybody's language is the same. Primary language for everyone is their sensory language. So for most individuals, we are so separate from our body. And what I would suggest, and we can do a practice, I don't know if you want to do it now or towards the end, but when we think about helping ourselves to sit and acknowledge that activation and our response, we really need to help ourselves feel safe again. And when it comes to the relationships, relating to other people, relating to people at work, relating to your partner, relating to, I mean, the whole world is about relating, really, if you think about it. Many times it's about you needing to feel safe. So my favorite thing to do, and it's so simple, is to grab a pillow. And
can I say, when I heard you talk about this before, this is one of the best things I've ever heard. Like, genuinely, it's so simple. When you said it, I'm a very touchy person. I love cuddling things. Like, so when I go to bed, I've got to cuddle a pillow. And the way you describe this exercise, sorry, I think this could be genuinely game changing for people because it's so simple that anyone can do. So I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I just want, like, for my audience to say that what you're about to share is genuinely something that I found fascinating. I've never heard anyone talk about it before. And when you just said there, actually, one of the first things that we developed, that we experienced as a baby to feel safe was touch. Again, never really heard that experience expressed like that as well. That's a fantastic thing I've never really thought about before. So I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I just wanted to say this is going. I like this a lot.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Honestly, it's so, well, there's so many spinoffs to this, but I think as humans, we make things so complicated, and that's also a safety response. So just know that if you feel like it's too simple, like tell your mind, we're just going to try this and give yourself some time with it. So the pillow, hugging a pillow, so placing the pillow on the front of your chest, I like to use a bed-sized pillow that would support under my chin and go all the way down to my belly. That contact we're making and the physical connection that you're making with wrapping your arms around the pillow, it's replicating a hug, right? And for many of us that are guarded, or I know I was very guarded in my relationships, it was hard for me to fully relax in a hug. It might take you a bit of time. And remember that when you're holding on to this pillow, the pillow's number one thing for you, the number one job, you can actually go to the store and look at the signs on the pillows and say support, some level of support. Its one more job is to support you, right? And most of the time it's supporting the back of your head. But today it's going to support the front of you. And so just allow yourself to fully feel into that level of support. And the way to do that is by feeling into the connections that you're making with that pillow. So this is where some of that nervous system work starts to you really start to do the work, right? Nervous system work is feeling and sensing into the body. It's called interoception. It's really important. This is how you help yourself become more present. It's actually what they mean when they talk about being in the now, is actually going in the body and feeling in the body. And so when you're holding onto that pillow, feel into the touch points that are being created with your belly and your chest. And just sense what that connection is. There might be vibration, there might be a temperature change, whatever it is, sense into that connection. Move into your arms. What does it feel like for you to have your arms wrapped around something and feel into that support? And honestly, sometimes I'll sit there for 5 minutes with just holding the pillow. Sometimes it'll take 15, right? But this practice is about creating what we call containment. And many times in our day, when we have so much coming at us, like if you think about it, even 20 years ago, we didn't have as much information coming at us. I was thinking back to college, which by the way, I'm super old. So I was like, we had like a computer lab and you had to sign up because nobody had computers. And it was like really annoying. The computers were really annoying, right? Like that was the level of the technology in my life. And so now there's so much coming at us all of the time that even though you're not even thinking about it, your body is taking in all of that information. So when you had that comment happen in the morning, you were probably already so inundated. Your body was already so inundated with information. It gets you into a place of overwhelm and not being able to really process what was being said. So I always recommend coming into a place of containment with safety. You can do this too with just hugging a partner or hugging a friend and creating that heart-to-heart connection. It's been proven that hugging another person will lower your cortisol. But if you're doing this work of acknowledgement around your emotions, definitely taking a moment to sit with the pillow and allowing some of that stress response to just release, allow yourself to ease, and making sure that you're going internally and feeling into those touch points that are being created with the pillow. And from there, acknowledge how you feel. So maybe in the moment that comment happened, you felt many different feelings. Maybe you felt frustrated, maybe you felt hurt, maybe you felt embarrassed, maybe you felt like, not good enough, whatever it might be. The pillow helps you to really clarify what those primary feelings are. And if you sit and allow yourself to acknowledge, that comment really hurt me. And it's okay to feel that hurt. I feel that hurt. I'm going to just sit with that hurt and allow myself to process that hurt right now with this pillow. Then you can come to a place of greater clarity. Okay, so I know that person loves me and I know that person cares for me. So what do I need to learn from my perception of what they were saying? Because all of this is about you perceiving, you taking in information. That's what your mind does. It's learn something years and years ago when you were really young, and it basically categorized it. Hey, when someone says something like that, it's hurtful to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so your partner or your boss may not have meant it in that way, but you perceived it that way. So then it's about, okay, well, what do I need to know about this hurt?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But that exercise is so helpful. It's helped me. It's helped many of my clients, just bringing yourself into a place of safety, because the reality is all of the stuff that's bombarding you all of the time, all the information, it's putting you in this constant need of feeling like you have to respond, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're in this hyper vigilant state. And the reality is, right now, in this moment, with this pillow, sitting with myself, feeling into my body, sensing into my body, allowing myself to feel supported, everything's okay.
Yeah.
Like, everything in this moment is okay, right? And
Uh,
what I want to respond to and look at is this hurt that I feel.
One thing you said as well, that you said, is that if you put your chin on the pillow, it's again as if you've got your chin on someone else's shoulder as well. And I love that. And so I just want to touch on with this because obviously me and you, we kind of understand emotions, feelings.
Mm-hmm.
When clients are first doing this,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel that people struggle to identify how they're feeling?
Mm-hmm.
Because most people don't allow themselves to feel. So they'll be there hugging that pillow. And again, you may be asking them, how are you feeling? And I don't know. They know they're feeling something, but they don't actually know what they're feeling. I think that's one of the common problems as well, is that people feel things, but they don't know what it is. And again, they'll choose umbrella terms like I'm happy or I'm sad. And again, that's a good start, but that doesn't really help really identify. So is there a process for people listening to this? So let's say they do that pillow activity, because it's really simple to do. And so just so I can clarify here, you're hugging the pillow, you're letting yourself feel whatever it is you're going to feel. Mm-hmm. And then once you then process that, it's then asking yourself questions about why did you feel that way, etc. But again, come from a place of love and compassion towards yourself. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And just to clarify that.
Yes.
So the second step of how am I feeling? What am I feeling? What advice would you give to someone that's doing this and they're like, Amy, I'm feeling something, but I don't know what I'm feeling. What would you do in that situation? Because I imagine that's a very common thing. So how would people go deal with that?
Yeah. It's really interesting because we always know how we're feeling. We might just not be able to put a label on it. So
yes.
People will, I'll have them describe what it's like. Is it, when you say that you feel something in your body, does it look like something? Is there texture to it? What is it? Is it like bubbling? Is it bouncing? Is it tight? Tell me what the sensation is in your body. You don't even need to know what the emotion is. Just describe what the sensation is. Oh, it feels like squiggly lines. I get that a lot, by the way. It feels like squiggly lines. Interesting. Okay, tell me more about the squiggly lines. Well, they're dark and they kind of feel like they're nervous, or they're like going around in circles. They don't know what to do, right? And that's a lot of information. But the squiggly lines is how their brain is basically keeping a file of whatever that feeling might be, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so we unpack it from their sensory experience. It's not about me saying, well, no, that's not a feeling. Like, I would never say that. Like, describe the sensory experience of it. Oh, it feels really tight. Okay, tell me more about that tightness. Well, it looks angry, right? Like, it's amazing how quickly you get there when you just start to speak the sensory language, which is why sensing into your body isn't about necessarily needing to quickly identify the feeling. You can just sit with the squiggly lines or the tightness. A lot of times I actually have back pain because I did an exercise I shouldn't have at 48. My acupuncturist yesterday was like, don't do that anymore. But I was sitting with the tightness in my back, and, was also processing like what that tightness was representing for me, and the timing of it showing up in sort of my own personal development journey. And it was representing a bit of self-doubt. And I just let myself focus on imagining breathing into that space, like breathing into that, giving it room to like let go, letting it ease out, like imagining that for it. I didn't do any processing around self-doubt. I didn't do any of that. I just actually let myself just focus on the sensory experience of my body. And if I wanted it to, if it wanted to release, if it wanted to let go, giving it support through the mobilization, right? So, I know a lot of individuals are like, I don't want to feel my feelings. And that's okay, because that means that you just haven't had a safe space in which to do that before. And the safe space is doing these practices where you create your own sense of safety. So, where you hold the pillow, sometimes I have a client build a pillow fort and like they need a bit more. I also do something called, my gosh, I can't remember the name of it, but essentially where you're laying in bed and you have a lot of pillows supporting you and you have a blanket kind of covering you. And that's when they can start like suddenly start to feel their body relax, right? So there's a lot of somatic exercises that you can do to create safety. And for everybody listening, start there. Like, just start with safety.
Isn't it so interesting? Because do you know when you there, you talk about the pillows and lying on your side and building a fort. Isn't it very interesting that most people, when they go through heartbreak or something bad's happened to them, what's the first thing that they go and do? Go into bed. Because when you're doing this, I was having flashbacks to when I was depressed, and that's basically what I do. I just wrap myself up in pillows and blanket and just turn off from the world. In movies, when people are heartbroken and sad, what's the image that you see them? They're hugging that pillow. It's that safety. But it's fascinating. And I love what you said there again about not just being worried about describing the word of I'm feeling this feeling or this emotion, actually using other ways to describe it, because ultimately, again, what are emotions? Energy in motion. And it's like just all we've done is just the body's felt this thing, and then we've slapped a label on it. Oh, you're feeling anxious, or you're feeling this. Well, what does that actually mean? It's just a word we've associated with a feeling. So actually, to describe that feeling, as you said, then I've never heard described that word before. You then allowing that person to feel actually what they're feeling using their words, which is relevant to them, which is, I think, fantastic. And I think that's what you've just shared there is absolutely golden, and it's something that I'll be practicing myself, because sometimes I'm always curious in how I'm feeling, and obviously I'm quite well versed in figuring that out. But actually, using things that, well, what does it look like? Squiggly lines or something like that. I think that's another way of attacking that and getting a little bit deeper into that practice. I think it's fantastic. Now, can we just talk about when we're starting to feel our feelings and our emotions and stuff like that? How's that then linked into needs and values? Because I've heard you mention about needs and values before, and I don't think people understand needs, boundaries, and values. So can we just sort of like wrap this conversation around, like to bring it full circle? Because I think this is a big thing. Once you've understood what stress actually is, you then learn to do these emotions. Now actually looking at your own needs, values, and boundaries, like what does that actually look like? What does it mean for a start? And what does it look like?
Yeah. So the emotional work will tie into that piece, because the work that I do, we do the nervous system work, we do sitting with the body, we sense into the body, we start to build a bridge to understanding our emotions, because like I said before, how I interpret anger might be different from you. So you're learning your emotional blueprint, essentially, right? And those emotions are pointing to things that are important to you, right? So for me, like, I feel the emotion of disgust when someone is hurting an animal. Like, it really is disgusting to me, right? And so there's a value there. I feel a tremendous amount of sadness, because I have a deep amount of empathy for people that are going through something, and I can feel that sadness, the heartbreak of something, And so for me, there's a value there of having connection and being supportive, right? So with the work that I do, we start with the nervous system, we get to a place of safety, we start to feel into our feelings, we start to learn what our feelings represent for us. And then it becomes very clear to us through that process what the most important things to us are in life, or in a specific part of our life. Now, what you were mentioning about relationships, so interesting, because everybody comes to me initially with different things, and it always comes down to relationships every single time. And so the majority of the time we do values in terms of relationships, whether they're, a partner or friendships or just relationships in general, family. And we talk about values represent the most important thing to you about being in a relationship with someone? What are the most important things to you, right? And there's like a series of questions I go through. What motivates you to be in a relationship with someone, right? Our values then point to our beliefs about ourselves, beliefs about the world, and some of that there might be some work to do, some mindset work to do around that, because it might be pulling you away from something. Like, for example, if we did values around money, someone might say, well, I want money because I don't want to be destitute, right? And so there's a level of fear there that we need to work on. But when I do values, I do a series of questions to help individuals realize what that points to in terms of a need in relationships, right? So, okay, well, communication, great. That's a great value in relationships. Tell me more about that. How do you know that there's good communication in your relationship? How does that show up? What does that look like to you? And I want you to tell me from a sensory place, because I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think it's like 50 something percent of our communication is through like our body language, right? So I want you to tell me what good communication looks like to you from body language. And then we come into a place of like, oh, I can be really specific about what I need. When I'm with my partner and I want to have a conversation, I really need that partner to sit across from me and to be in a place where they're not distracted and to be focused so we can have a conversation where I know that he's listening, right? And that's a need. That is like when someone says, yeah, I really value good communication. Okay, well, good communication might be different for me. So tell me exactly what you need when it comes to good communication, right? And it's interesting. I just had a conversation with somebody about this last night, and she was like, oh my gosh, I finally feel like I can, speaking of communication, I can actually be more specific about what's important to me, in this relationship, and how that person might not even understand or know that that's a need for me because I've never been able to articulate it. Mm-hmm. And from that place, you can then set your boundaries. You can say, well, if I'm wanting to have a conversation with my partner and he's on his phone, he's like, yeah, I'm listening. And then my boundary is, we're not going to have this conversation until I have, your full attention, because that that's something I need from you right now. I want to share with you what's on my heart, and I really need you to be present with me. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of times we try to set boundaries without having all that information. And for those of us that are people pleasers, hello, it's very hard for us to get behind that boundary. It's hard for us to reinforce because it just feels like a generic boundary. Like, okay, I'm not going to take phone calls after 7 p.m. Okay, well, what about that's important to you? Is there a real value behind that? Be specific about it. How is that fulfilling a need for you? Is it because it's allowing you to focus and be more present with your family? Okay, great. Or maybe you just saw that on, a blog and you're like, that sounds like a good idea, right? And so it's really important for you to create that connection with yourself. And all of this work, the nervous system work, the emotional blueprint, understanding your emotions and what they mean to you, identifying your values and needs and setting those boundaries, you really begin to have a deeper level of compassion for yourself, and yourself. Mm-hmm. Like you feel like, oh goodness, like I actually know who I am, which, that woman in the mirror that was looking back at me in 2018, I didn't know who I was, right? And now I'm at a place where I can articulate the needs that I have in my life. I can articulate what my emotions represent for me. I can articulate who I am from that place. And it's so interesting because I recently was able to finally finish the book, The Power of Now. I had a psychic tell me in 2019. Book. Yeah. She's like, oh, your ego has to die. I was like, okay, I don't know what that means, but that sounds really scary. And she's like, buy this book and you'll try to read it several times. You won't understand it. You won't understand it, but just keep trying to read it. And I recently had a spiritual death and I'm in my spiritual rebirth right now. And 2 weekends ago, I was like, let me just see if I can read that book. And I read it cover to cover in like, a few hours. So
That's impressive. It took me a little longer to read it.
well, it's because basically
Yeah.
what he's talking about is the
Yeah.
stuff that I have experienced, and I actually needed to do this myself, right? For it to fully like land and for it to fully integrate and for me to be like, oh, this is the path to higher states of consciousness. This is spiritual work, even though we're not talking about like, and I love all of this stuff, like saging things and like ceremonial things. Actually, if you can be in ceremony with your body in this way, that is spiritual. Like that is the deepest spiritual connection that you can have with yourself is through this process of healing. That's my biggest belief. And that's sort of based on the like Buddhist theory of being here.
I fully believe that we are spiritual beings with an intellect in a physical body. And when it comes to doing any sort of work on yourself, it has to be spiritual because you are a spiritual being. That's my full belief, and no one can convince me otherwise of that. It's just there's too much evidence to counteract it. I just want to quickly just tie a nice bow in the boundary setting stuff, especially when it comes to relationships, and especially when it comes to intimate relationships, whether like an intimate partner. Because I think one of the biggest things is the communication side of stuff. So it's all great. So you're doing the work, your partner's not, which again, very stereotypical, but normally it's the women that do the work, the men won't. So whenever I'm working with female clients, I'll explain to them that you've got to communicate your boundaries and all of these needs on their level. Because you're going through this spiritual stuff, you're doing this stuff, like guys don't even know what boundary is. So you've got to make sure that you actually communicate on their level, because they just won't understand. So you're saying, oh, you've got to go off your phone. Okay, well, explain why. Like actually on a basic level, explain to them so they fully get it. You're speaking on their language. You're going down to their level. But the point I want to get with that is defending your boundaries. Because it's very easy for a partner to be like, oh, yeah, no problem. I'll face you. I'll sit upright. I'll get off my phone. And that lasts for a week. And then they go back again. You've got to keep defending. At what point do you have to accept that the other person is not going to respect your boundaries and may not? And this is a really loaded question, so I do apologize. At what point do you get to where someone's not respecting your boundaries and it really is affecting you on an emotional level? Is that something you find with clients where you're like, I keep telling them they're just not listening? Like, how do you help clients? I know a lot of people struggle with this. They're on their journey and their partner just does not get it. They don't want to get it, and it's stopping this person from actually moving through the stages. Like, what's your take on that?
It's so interesting. I've had this question asked to me like for the last 3 days. Different people have been asking me this question. So it must be the energy around this is really prevalent right now. So I think it really depends on you. And I'll also say, if you can come from a place of curiosity, rather than it being like, this is a hard boundary for me, right? If you trust your partner, that they have very good intentions and that they love you and that they care for you and they are struggling with this aspect of your relationship, it's time to employ a little bit of curiosity, because as we've already talked about, there are things that have been imprinted in you and your responses to things are imprinted. They're from a long time ago, right? So it's quite possible that, for example, this imaginary person who's on the phone when you don't want them to be, there might be a level of avoidance, right? And there might be a level of avoidance because they're afraid of that emotional connection in that way. So there's an opportunity for you to be curious. And if that curiosity is saying to them, okay, I'm noticing that you're still on your phone. Can we talk about that? Like, I love you and I want this to work. And this is a need of mine. I really am genuinely curious, what's happening in that moment. And if they don't want to talk about it, like that might be, that's your motion for you to decide how the depth of this relationship, right? That's a very individual thing. But I do believe that there's so much healing that can happen between two people. I actually think that relationships are a powerful moment for you to heal a lot of stuff for yourself. And so it may also be that you need, as you've had all this curiosity and healing for yourself and compassion, right? Feeling into your heart space for that person that is really struggling to look you in the eye and is like needs to be distracted. There's something going on there, right? Like there's something there that they are sitting with it needs to heal. And
Mhm.
so can you be compassionate in that moment, right?
Mhm.
And still hold your boundary.
Yep.
It's not like you're saying, I'm going to let you get with it, away with this, and I'm not going to value my needs. But it's not about also necessarily, pointing a finger or saying you did this to me or getting angry with the person. Like, can
Yep.
you employ a level of compassion and curiosity?
I absolutely love that. And also, like I said, I'll just put myself in again this hypothetical situation. It is completely hypothetical, but it's again, I'm thinking from a woman's perspective to a male. Because again, I know how I've been in the past. If when I was not in a good headspace, if someone again completely unconscious headspace, should I say rather, that if a girlfriend of mine was saying to me, "Listen, I need you to look at me, sit up straight, go film me, talk to me," I would instantly feel like I was being told off. So straight away,
Yeah.
so again, that might be something that was a trigger of mine actually when I was younger. So then straight away, and again, it's just the reason I'm saying that is just for people to really understand what we're talking about here. Is that again, as you said earlier on about the other hypothetical situation where someone said something, you've interpreted it the wrong way, by you
Mm-hmm.
actually saying that your need is this and that actually the other person that comes across to them as you're about to get told off, so then they're going to go right on the defensive. So again, I love what you said. That was a fantastic way to answer that question, because again, it is completely individual, but it was absolutely brilliant. My final question I ask all my guests is, what one bit of advice, I know you've given a lot here today, what bit of advice would you give to a woman out there right now that is feeling lost and out of control?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, doing what you can to slow down, whatever that looks like for you, and to feel, create that sense of safety. For me, it was about having a connection to my therapist. That was the beginning of like, I finally felt safe. I felt safe enough with her. She was also a gift from the universe, I swear. Like, I hear stories about people trying to find therapists and it's really hard. But like, allow yourself the moment to slow down. And, you know, like I said before, the nervous system is a safety response. And so if you feel like you're out of control and you're a mess, you need to come into a place where you create that containment for yourself. So that pillow exercise, start there, right?
Yep.
I didn't learn that pillow exercise until like early last year. And I was like, I wish I had known this like years ago. It was such a important moment for me. And the funny thing about it is that the pillow also will help you remember good things. Like, that's a whole nother
Yes.
episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I will say, like, that just means that it's time for you to be more connected with yourself, and you don't have to be connected with your mind. Like, that's actually it's wreaking havoc. It's
Mm-hmm.
making your life more
Mm-hmm.
complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Do what you can to come into the body. Um, I'm actually gonna, I don't know how this works, but I'm gonna send you a link to do a preview of my nervous system course on my app.
Amazing.
So individuals can do some of the components on there for free,
Amazing.
um, and learn what it means to like sense and feel into the body. And that's what I'd recommend. That's where to start.
Honestly, absolutely incredible. I'll make sure that's all linked in the show notes. Amy, where can people find out about you if they want to connect? What's your Instagram and your website?
Yeah, my website is therecreated.com, and my Instagram handle is the_recreated_.
I'll make sure that Mikey pops that all across the screen so people can connect with you. Amy, thank you very, very much. Honestly, it's been an incredible episode, and thank you for all the value that you've shared today.
No, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.